Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 4th of August 2021, coming to you from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And from me, David G7ERP. Good to see you. On tonight's show, we have the inside story of the new EMF regulations with Ian, GM3SEK. Your news and views, including details of this fascinating video about radio communications for SpaceX travel. And we have this, the very last shack on our very long-running competition. This is Shack 69 actually, because the first couple of shows we didn't have a shack. So this is really important. Who worked from a shack like this? We have had quite a few entries. Not too late though. If you didn't get it to us, pop it on either Facebook or on BATC and we'll read it out when we get to that shack in a moment. This is the last shack. Well, you can't wait.
Shack.
Anyway, but first we'd like to tell you about one of our members, Lorna 2E0POI, who's written to tell us that she's been commissioned by the RSGB to edit a new refreshed version of this book, Computers in Amateur Radio, and that quite a few chapters need new contributors. And also one chapter needs, in fact, to be completely rewritten to bring it up to date. You can imagine that sort of book, because of the changes of computers, operating systems, and then things like FT8 and all those different modes. This sort of book, I guess, must be regularly updated. And one of our own members is going to be doing it. She's going to be the editor. So if this is anything that would interest you to write a chapter, maybe there's a particular computer mode or computer way you use computers that might be interesting, you'd like to help contribute, edit, whatever, with Lorna, then please contact her. Her email address is there, and we'll also put this in the newsletter as well. So please contact her, and then she'll send you the details of the chapters, deadlines, and other information. So good luck with that, Lorna. Great to another budding author amongst us. Next, from John M6JAU. Now, this YouTube video contains some interesting information about the radio links that SpaceX use to relay video images to the public. We're just going to show you a little bit of it now. And the link for this will be included in this week's newsletter and on our website. But let's have a little look now.
This episode of Primal Space is supported by Skillshare. You are currently riding on board a Falcon 9 rocket as it descends through the atmosphere at over 500 kilometers per hour. What happens next is truly incredible. At the last possible second, it fires up its engines and lands perfectly in the middle of the drone ship. But there's nothing new about this. SpaceX have been landing rockets for years. But what is impressive is that we actually saw it live. Ever since they started landing rockets, SpaceX have had a problem actually showing us. It's arguably the most exciting part of each mission. But the cameras at the landing zone are well known for cutting out, just as the rocket comes into frame. Of course, some people will claim that this is where SpaceX ran out of their special effects budget, but actually, the problem is much more complex. You have to remember that each drone ship landing usually takes place hundreds of kilometers offshore.
Anyway, that's just a taster there. I don't think we'd have the rights to show you much more than that. But it really is fascinating, and if you want to know how they conquer this and how they get the video and the radio communications and everything so that you'll be able to see this live, then it's a really good thing to follow. So thank you very much to John M6JAU for sending us that. I really think that'll be lots of interest to many of you, particularly if you're interested in radio and space, because it certainly combines them both, and we'll put the link, as I said, on our newsletter. Finally, Chris M7JEX wrote to us and told us about a new website that he's created. If we can have a look at this, Tammy, now. This is just gives you, it's called QRZ Book, and it's something, he says, he's designed a new amateur radio community and currently looking to drum up a bit of interest. Would be good if you could maybe have a look and pass it around your club members, and of course that's why we're showing it to you now. It's all funded by him. It's not for any kind of profit, he says, just to give something back to the community. Now, I must admit, I did join a couple of hours ago and had a quick look round. You can't see much until you put some basic details in. And it does look really good. I mean, you can see there's an awful lot of work gone into it. I must say it looks slick, professional. I imagine if Chris did this, he's a professional programmer, I would think. Only 178 members so far, but it's only just started. So it might be something to have a look at. I can't endorse it in any way because I literally just joined a little while ago this afternoon. But it does look interesting. It's lots of things in one place as well. So that may be very good. And I hope you can see at the top there we've got a forum, propagation, the DX cluster and things like that. So worth having a look. It's completely free, he says as well. So that's the address to look at. It's https://qrzbook.net. Thanks for sending us that, Chris. And finally, an update on an appeal that I put out on a couple of newsletters recently about the trophy fox hunt. Now, as you know, last month, was it last month? Yeah, last month or June, Tammy, I can't remember. Maybe. Anyway, I think it was July. We did the friendly fox hunt, our direction finding hunt. We did it as our very first outside broadcast. We didn't really know how it would go and how what you think about it. But it seemed a lot of fun at the time for those of us who were part of it. And judging by all the feedback, everybody enjoyed it. One thing we specifically asked you is that we've got our trophy fox hunt for the trophy coming up in later this month. And we asked you whether you would like to see that live or whether, you'd seen the first one and maybe you've sort of seen how it works and that's it. Well, overwhelmingly, all of you, apart from one actually, wanted to see the trophy fox hunt live. So on the 25th of August, which is in, let's think, 3 weeks' time, on NARC Live, you'll be able to watch another direction finding fox hunt. We probably can't quite show all of the details so much because this is serious in that the teams that are taking part will be trying to win and get to the fox in the shortest number of miles. It's not a race against time, remember. It is a competition to find and locate the fox with the shortest possible distance. Now, there's lots of details that we've already published. We've sent information already to quite a lot of the people who usually take part in this, but if it's something that interests you and you're available on that evening of the 25th of August, we'll start at Thorpe, just outside Norwich City itself. And all the details I can send to you, so just drop us an email to the usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com. I think they're out at the bottom of your screen now, if you're interested in taking part. There are a few rules and regulations you can imagine, but I can send those details to you if you're interested. It's on 2 meters, that's how we do our direction finding hunts, and it is not one on foot, it is the sort of thing you need to car for, but remember it's not a race. It is all about a competition to find it in the shortest possible distance. So it's as much about, I think everybody would agree with me, it's as much about tactics and a bit of luck, as well as map reading and all those other skills as well. And it's a lot of fun. So I hope you'll all look forward to seeing that as well on the 25th of August in 3 weeks' time. And
does that mean I've got to be in charge again?
I was going to say, you'll be in charge, but just like before, I'll have Tammy in my ear all night.
Well, I had you in my ear all night.
Well, I know. That's called talk back, so that we could talk to each other and try and vaguely make sense of this. But it was a lot of fun, and let's hope it goes as well, or even better next time. I think you showed a picture, did you, while I was talking there?
I didn't actually, no.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
No, I was a little bit worried because I think we may have cut out on Facebook for a moment,
okay.
But we're there now.
We're there now. So we'll just show you this picture. This is one of the extracts from the video that we did, although this was live. So apart from a few seconds delay that we had, this was all done live using 4G connectivity.
Yep.
Probably be a couple of hours of live fox hunting in and around Norfolk.
They were our winners on the night, weren't they?
They were. That was the Bitten Club group. Isn't it ironic? All those other members were, I think, members of Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, but these members are members of both NARC and of the Bitten group, and they were the winners on the night. So if you don't want them to win the trophy, dare I say, you need to take part. And just another, actually, sorry, Tammy, can you put that back? I'm sorry. I will just say one thing. We did have a bit of feedback from some people saying they thought it was maybe a bit unfair that some people have very sophisticated Doppler systems and, very sophisticated, costing hundreds of pounds, some of them. And then some people had some very basic gear, which just uses basically a handheld and a couple of aerials. Well, I would point out now that the winning team there, if you look at the equipment that Alex has got in his hands, that is basically based on our £8 DF100 kit, which just literally connects to a handheld. I think if you look in his right hand there, he's holding that long rectangular box is actually a handheld. It's an oldish VHF radio, and the box on top with a couple of extra bits that he talked about, and we'll look at again on the Fox Hunt if they take part, which hopefully they will. There's a meter and things like that he's added, but it's basically a very simple kit. Not Doppler, nothing sophisticated, and it's a kit that we sell to NARC members only for £8. So there we are. You don't have to have all the sophisticated stuff. You can see that Steve there is holding a map as well. Very important to it. So a lot of luck, a lot of fun, and quite a bit of skill as well. Look forward to that on the 25th of August.
Sonny says that the Fox Hunt is 98% luck, 1% skill and 1% equipment.
Well, I wouldn't disagree. I think there is some luck as well, but then he did quite well, didn't he, with his team? So, all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, we look forward to it. Tammy, this part of the show, always hand over to you. Let's have a look at your little people this week.
Okay.
I haven't seen them, so I'm now going to see them for the first time along with you at home.
Here's the little people for this week. I don't know about anybody else, but I've been enjoying the Olympics. I'm supposed to be working at the moment, but you know, when the bosses start looking, I put the Olympics on. So
really,
I thought this is the stationary Olympics.
Remind me who your boss is again.
Oh, I can't remember. Some geezer.
Right, thanks. Okay. Wow, now that is good, isn't it? So it's like a couple of spiral-bound notebooks there, and
the hurdles. I like the hurdles.
Yes, is they staples?
Yeah.
Oh, that is genius, isn't it?
It's cool, isn't it?
It never ceased to amaze me, the ingenuity. And I like the bottom right, you can see they've got a whole stack of staples as they're taking them apart.
Them off, yeah.
Yeah, that's been wonderful.
It's good.
There we are. If you're interested in those, there's a different picture every day. Japanese, actually, as well, isn't it? We mentioned it last week. This is a Japanese website, but so quite appropriate for the Olympics. There we are. There's the address, miniature-calendar.com. And we'll bring you a new picture every week, as always. So, what have you been doing? We've had a bit of news from you this week. Don't forget to keep in touch with us. And that address to send it to any information, any stories, any appeals you want to put out. Pictures are lovely this time of year, especially as well. There we are, radio@dcpmicro.com. If you can get them to us by 3 o'clock on a Wednesday, we can normally use them on that show. Now, I've been hinting at this for ages. I think around Christmas I was saying we've nearly run out of shacks, so it's nearly going to end. Here we are in early August, and we have got the last shack. We've been running this competition since we started, or just I think the second week in, wasn't it, or third week?
Second or third week in.
Yeah.
This is the 69th shack.
Right, and so we've been doing about 72 shows, something like that.
72 shows, yeah.
Okay, so here it is. This is the final shack. Who do you think worked in a shack like this? Now, I must admit, we've had quite a few entries this week.
We have. We've had a couple of extra entries as well. So, I'll start.
I love the comments.
I'll start with those.
Right.
Sunny M0SYW says, I believe I have seen this image a few times before. It's a young Roger G3 LDI.
And I love what Malcolm has also said on BATC. He says, yes, I also think it's Roger. He still wears that sweater. Well, who knows? Well, we don't know if you're right or not, because not everybody thinks it's Roger.
No.
Let's go through them, Tammy. You start.
Okay, Martin G3ZQU says, this week's shack shows Roger G3 LDI from a while ago. It must be his post-Heathkit period, as he has a Drake separators in his picture.
Separates.
Oh, separates.
Separates.
Oh, yeah. Separates.
It means they're not together, because the transceivers weren't around in the early days.
Okay. You can read the next one.
All right. Jim G4BDW says, I vaguely remember seeing that globe and desk lamp in Roger G3 LDI's shack at Swardston. I reckon that picture was taken in his previous shack when he lived in Wyndham.
James M0ZAH says, this week's shack belongs to Roger G3 LDI when he lived in Wyndham.
And John G8VPE also thinks it's Roger G3 LDI's shack.
Paul G3VPT says, is it Roger G3 LDI? Although I don't remember him having that hairstyle.
I must admit, the one that we put on the website was a little bit more flowery than that, fluffy, wasn't it? Mark G0GJ says that the shack is Roger G3 LDI, so it's all sounding quite biased towards that now.
It is, although I've got a different one here. So Chris G4CCX thinks it may be David G3 MPN behind the bubble.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm just checking actually on Facebook, make sure nobody's put any other guesses on there. Nigel2E0NLK says, I think it could be Roger G3 LDI.
John G3XLL. My guess is it is our very own Roger G3LDI. Thank you for the Wednesday shows, he says.
And Stephen M6KYF says, have I seen that shack published somewhere before? Roger G3LDI, he thinks.
Carl G3XGK. I would guess that it is that old man or young man in the photo, Roger G3LDI. I think I can spot the Elizabethan AM rig in the rack to the left that he built many, many, many years ago.
Let's have a look at that. Okay. And Simon M0SIH, he says this shack belongs to Roger Cook G3LDI because there's the same photograph on his QRZ page with his face showing.
Oh.
So Tammy...
We've had Noel, G8GTZ, says, I actually remember that shack before he moved to Swarston. So he thinks it's also Roger. And we've also had John 20TWQ says, Roger the shirt, definitely Roger. And Douglas Spooner has just said, definitely Roger, G3LDI. So who do you reckon it is?
It's looking, well, is it... who did Chris think it was? David
G3.
Probably not, actually. So let's have a look. Tammy, reveal for the very last time, the 69th time, who worked from a shack like this?
Well, it was Roger.
It was Roger.
Of course.
How does he keep those young looks and keep that shirt looking so fresh?
Yeah.
Well done. Well, we must admit, we thought this is one that several of you would get. And we did kind of leave it till last because of that, although we didn't give any real clues to it. But obviously Roger's very well known and that equipment looks pretty unique as well. So thank you to all of you for taking part. Either whether you were one of the 69 people who sent us a picture of your shack, or whether you were one of the, I guess, hundreds of people who've probably entered over the time. Sometimes, some weeks we'd only get one entry, wouldn't we, Tammy?
We would, yeah.
And then sometimes, I don't think we never got any. I think we certainly had times we only got one entry or something, one guest. And then others where we got lots. But it's been thanks to you at home, both for sending us pictures of your shack and for entering, that's made that competition last so long. It's fantastic. We will be back with a new competition next week. But before the new competition next week, we will be doing a roundup of all the shacks. And although you might think that sounds boring, I think it'd be quite fun to look back because there'll be shacks that you remember. Some of them are quite different, remember, some of them quite original. I won't give any hints here, and there's also a few shacks that we couldn't or didn't show. There were some duplicates, maybe people had two different shacks or a mobile shack or something like that. And there was one in particular, I don't know if I could tell you. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you there is one shack which has its own toilet. And we didn't think we ought to show it. It was the person's second shack. And I won't tell you any more. But that will be also on next week's shack. So we're going to do a special shack roundup, aren't we? Yep. Tammy. And so I hope you look forward to that. And then we'll launch the brand new competition as well. We'll keep that a secret until next week. So thanks again to all of you for taking part and making that competition last so long. We, as we've said many times, we had no idea that we'd be doing this many times later anyway, this long later. But it's thanks to you to keep us going and all of that. Now, next week at NARC, let's have a look at what's happening there before we get onto our main feature tonight. The GB2RS news is on Sunday at 7 o'clock. Actually, I'm reading it this week. Give Mike a rest. On Monday, the 9th of August, also Steve G3EVA, who's been running that net on a Monday night, we think for over a year, he just wants a little break. So some of the regular contributors are going to step in the next few Mondays and take the net for him. And first up is Ken M0KJW. That's at 7:30 on GB3MB next Monday. At 8:30, we've got the 80-metre CW net. And next Wednesday, the 11th of August, very important, we want to tell you about this, because this is an interactive, but it's not like an interactive that we've done before, really, because the subject is going to be us, about this club. As you will know, that many of the restrictions in this country have lifted now, and some clubs have indeed have started again. But we'd like to know what you think about Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, whether you like this, whether you want this to continue, whether you can't wait us to get back to the school or maybe another venue. We're really, because we're our club, and although we've done this for a long time now, we really do want to hear from you, and we think this will be a great opportunity. So it will be a Zoom interactive session. If you can join us by Zoom, It doesn't necessarily need a camera, but you will need a microphone to do that. But you can just join us in voice if you wish to. We'll send a link on the newsletter and on the website this weekend, and we'll send it again early next week to remind you. You just have to click on the link. It may download a small little app onto your phone or your tablet or your computer, and you can take part. If you can't take part that way, or you'd rather not, then you can of course join us in the usual way on Facebook or on BATC and type in questions and comments. Or if you'd like to make any suggestions or thoughts about this, remember that we're talking next week purely about Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. Let us have them on an email, and let us have them by 3 o'clock next Wednesday, and we'll be very happy to share them. This is the email address at the bottom of your screen, radio@dcpmicro.com. Tell us what you think about Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. Should we be going back now to meeting for real? Should we have some meetings, some socials, whatever you feel? We're here to listen to you. We've had a committee meeting actually a couple of days ago to share that with you, and we've had a discussion, and there was no clear-cut answer. So that's why we thought we really need to ask you, the NARC members, and we look forward to seeing you and hearing you and talking with you next week on NARC Live from 7:30. And finally, I just want to remind you that we'll be doing this for a while now. This is our Norfolk Amateur Radio Club card, which we're happy to send to anybody who you think may be cheered up. Maybe they're celebrating a birthday, maybe they're not feeling very well, or maybe they've got a celebration of an anniversary or something like that. We will send this card to anybody you like. We'll sign it on behalf of you and ourselves and the whole of the club, and be happy to send it to anyone literally anywhere in the world. So do let us know if you'd like us to do that. And that's about it for the club news now. Now, the next we come to our main event, and already this club has covered quite a lot about EMF and the ICNA regulations and the way that all of our licenses, whether you're a foundation, intermediate or full license, is changing this year with new regulations which we'll have to comply with from November this year over the next year and a half. Well, already we've had our own EMC advisors. We've had a presentation from them. We've also seen several presentations from the RSGB, both as webinars and, of course, lots of information written up in Radcom and magazines like that. But we thought we'd like a different slant on this. So tonight, it's really a great pleasure to welcome someone who's going to give us the inside story on those new changes to EMF regulations. And it's a real pleasure to welcome Ian, GM3SEK. Ian.
Yeah. Good evening, David. Thank you, and good evening to everyone from the territory of Wark, Wigtonshire Amateur Radio Club in southwest Scotland.
It's lovely, actually. We showed, if you want to say where you are, actually, we could just quickly show a picture of this, Ian, that you did send us from your QRZ page, so you could tell us exactly where you are.
Yeah, I'm definitely staying there. Wild horses won't drag me away.
And that really is quite remote, isn't
it? It's about 20 miles to the nearest medium-sized town, a bit more to Stranraer, which is underneath the 3 in my call sign. So that's the nearest click and collect that we've been going to every 2 weeks ever since lockdown. So, yeah, I suppose you call it remote.
I thought, well, it's lovely. It looks a lovely place to live. And we're looking forward, though, to your insight tonight into EMF. So we're going to now show your slides, and we'll leave it over to you. If you'd like to ask questions to Ian at any point during or after his presentation, then do so. You can either do that on BATC or Facebook as usual, and we'll be sure to read them to Ian either during, if it's relevant to do that, or we'll have them for the end. But right now, back to Ian with his presentation on behind the scenes of EMF.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, as you're well aware, this has been buzzing for quite some time, but actually for longer than you might imagine. I've got involved in this now because back in the late 1970s, early 80s, I was working for the National Radiological Protection Board, which for a long time was the agency that's responsible for advising government and everybody else really on exposures to radiation including electromagnetic fields. And this brewed up then, and a group of us, including the people who were in the full-time professional EMF group, got together. We did some measurements, we did some theory, we rubbed some numbers together, and it was agreed between NRPB and the Radio Communication Agency, as it then was, that there was no actual health benefit in introducing any new regulations. And there the matter rested. It went quiet for about 30 years. So in a way, the UK has had a 30-year holiday from having to think about that, until 5G brewed up and somebody at a very high level in Ofcom decided that something had to be done. And so this arrived out of the blue in February of last year, and the intention was that they would have a consultation period, and then Ofcom would come out with revised proposals, and finally they would make the final decision after a very short second phase of consultation. All of those things happened, but between the surprise in February and the actual decision, which came on the 18th of May this year, a long time elapsed, 15 months elapsed, and a lot of work was done. So this wasn't like the normal consultation where you expect that a government department will produce some proposals, they will have the consultation, and then they'll go ahead and do it anyway. This changed quite a bit as a result of the input from interested individuals and organizations, and notably the RSGB. We put an awful lot into that, and quite frankly gave Ofcom a large amount of free consultancy. RSGB formed a working party. I volunteered because I was the only one who was kind of still in touch with what had happened earlier on, and also the only one who had a formal qualification in radiation protection. So that's why I'm here. But we were extraordinarily lucky, as well as John Rogers, who I think most of you know, who is was the board member and chair of the EMC committee. We managed to get the services of Peter Zollman, G4DSE, who retired as something like chief engineer of Vodafone. And if you think what that implies and how far back he goes with Vodafone, this is a bright guy, as you're going to see. So come the 18th of May, these 4 documents appeared. One is the general notice of the final decision, which is just kind of administrative. Here were the points raised. This is what we decided. The second one, the important one to us, is the new amateur license, because our licenses aren't going to change. Our licenses already have. Then there's formal guidance, and finally Ofcom's less formal need to know guide for radio amateurs. So away we go then. That's the background to it, and I thought I'd better explain why me, because I sometimes need to remind myself of that. EMF, as we know, means electromagnetic fields, which is, it's the RF field strengths around your antennas, which, if they are very high, could have potential health effects. But only if somebody is present to experience those fields, RF fields. And the emphasis there is on the word is. If there isn't anybody there, then nobody is exposed and you're automatically compliant. If nobody's there, that's an automatic fact. And it's one of the cornerstones of radiation protection. If there's nobody there, then regulations for the exposure of people don't apply. So, quick need to know from the 18th of May. I delayed putting this talk together until last month to give things a little bit of time to settle down. I think we know where we are now. First of all, it is effective now. Our licenses have already been altered. What they've done is put in an additional paragraph in the main body of the license and stuck another of those things they call schedules onto the end. So for all practical purposes, if you download the new copy of that from the Ofcom website, and the URL will be at the end, I think you probably ought to do that, because it's your license and it's effective now. I guess if you renewed your license, you would get a copy that was personalized to you rather than the generic version. What isn't immediately happening is that we don't have to make assessments of the RF fields around all our antennas straight away. There's a staged rollout, which I'll talk about in a few seconds. But otherwise, we will all have to do this. It doesn't have to be hard, but it has to happen. It's that 30-year holiday thing I said, and eventually the bill will come in. You may also have noticed on the previous slide that I mentioned a member of the general public. That's quite specific. Ofcom have no interest in regulation of workers. That's HSE's business. They are also not saying anything at all about about what levels of EMFs we, as licensed amateurs, should allow ourselves to be exposed to. So maybe at the end of the talk, if somebody asks about that, I'll say a few words about that. But Ofcom is very specific about the general public, and not necessarily meaning anybody else, except the main people of relevance are the non-licensed amateurs in our own families. So you can imagine there's a can of worms there that hasn't really been opened. The staged rollout is going by frequency bands for a number of reasons, that partly administrative, partly technical. For 144 megs and up, assessments are required. We're required to have made the assessments by November 2021. It's actually the 18th of November, exactly 6 calendar months after the 18th of May when they first published this thing. 10 to 70 megs will follow, but those won't be required until May 2022. That's another 6 months down the line. And for 7 megs and down, because there are numbers of technical issues here, assessments are not going to be required until November of next year. So what I'd like to focus on in this talk is the one live issue, which is the VHF stuff, 144 megs and up. Having made the assessments, we just need to hang on to them to be available for inspection by Ofcom, should Ofcom choose to turn up. In the unlikely event of Ofcom coming and inspecting anybody's station, I'm guessing that they will be asking for asking to see what assessments you've already done. But I don't think there are very many of us who've had an inspection by the licensing agency. I certainly have never had one that wasn't prompted by RFI in 60 plus years, so it's not a major risk. There's good news in the latest version, because RSGB kept chivying. We end up with some exceptions or exemptions for many low power activities. So I'm going to be talking in a few minutes' time about the typical 5 watt VHF, UHF handheld, but they will also apply when the time rolls around to HF QRP operation as well. But you can think of these assessments a bit like doing a tax return, where even if it turns out that all the tax that you owe has been deducted at source, you nevertheless need to have done most of the tax return simply in order to record that fact. So you can't, if you think you're exempt, it wouldn't be wise to ignore it, because somebody checking up on you would have no way of telling whether you'd actually done anything at all. So this turns out to be quite easy. Just recording the fact that you're exempt is dead easy. So, right, we're going to have a staged rollout by frequency bands, and VHF is the live issue. And I'm going to give you 3 examples. One is using the low power exemption for an FM handheld, and this will show you how to use the RSGB EMF calculator, which I think you've seen before, but it does no harm to show you again, because there are some wrinkles in it which are useful to know. Second one is still using the calculator. What changes when you go to a base station? I think that will be fairly clear as this goes on. And the third is to give you a preview of what needs to be done differently for stations using high gain Yagis, because the calculator doesn't perform too well with directional antennas. So we've taken a different route called pre-assessed configurations. So it's the typical FM handheld first. This thing, and 5 watts integrated antenna used as the manufacturer intended. And the manufacturer will in fact say that if it's used in this way, it will be compliant with the American FCC standards and the ICNIRP standards, although that refers to an older version of the ICNIRP standards. So what can we do with this? Welcome once again to the RSGB EMF calculator. This is one busy screen. So I'm going to break it down into areas and then walk you through it. So I'm telling you what I'm going to do, then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what you've done, because that's really the only way to approach this. So we can divide this screen up into 4 major areas. This part at the top is all just admin that you don't need to fill in unless you actually want to archive the whole finished thing. But it's obvious that there are this kind of thing needs to be recorded. The next box is all about your transmitter, basically, and they don't all look like a TS2000, but never mind. And this is aiming to calculate the average RF power from your transmitter, which is the terms in which power needs to be described for this kind of assessment. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Second one is all about basically the losses between the transmitter and the antenna. So it's your feed line, what the length is, any other losses, and this reduces your average power into the antenna accordingly. And then the third box is where the results start to emerge. So that's the plan. And we'll start with the radio setup. I'm going to do this on 2 meters, even though this covers 2 bands. It works the same way. So these yellow things are either drop-down boxes or else the fields into which you have to type your own input. Anything that isn't yellow is going to be filled in by the spreadsheet. So 2 meters is the band that we're on. Transmit mode is voice FM. It fills in a representative frequency for the 2 meter band. Next, from you, it wants to know what's the transmitter power. Okay, I looked this up in the instruction manual because that is the most optimistic figure that you will ever see for the power coming out of your handheld. They won't fail to account for to claim every last milliwatt. Okay, that's fine. And then there are 2 more numbers to fill in. One is the so-called mode factor, which is what is the average power compared with the time spent transmitting. And for FM, it's full carrier all the time that you have pressed the PTT. So that figure automatically gets filled in as 100%. This one, transmit time in 6 minutes. Why 6 minutes? Because that's part of the EMF and therefore Ofcom regulations that you can and you should average the time that you spent transmitting. It can never get greater than 100%, so that's in there as a default, but you can alter it later. I'm just going to show you, in order to keep it simple, I'm going to leave that at 100%. So the average power from your transmitter is the same as the declared power. The peak power is the same as the declared power. Nothing more to say about that. So move on to the next box. The feeder. Members of the jury, I draw to your attention the fact that there isn't one. So this is easy. Or it should be. I wish there was a little box that you could tick to say no feed line, instead of which you have to select the type of cable, and right down at the bottom of the list you'll find something called custom, which then allows you to plug in, write in your own cable loss, and if you put that to 0, then it just ignores the fact that the cable is there. The length of cable in this case is immaterial because you've already said the losses are 0. There's a place here where you can put in other losses, leave that at the default of 0. So we've still got 5 watts as our average and peak figures. This box will come to life when we start to look at the home station. This final box is where results start to emerge. There's one final thing that you need to put in, which affects the equivalent isotropic radiated power, and that is the type of antenna, obviously. For this assessment, you can be pessimistic. You can put in a half-wave dipole. For EMF assessment purposes, it doesn't matter whether it's fed at the top or the bottom or what. But this rubber duck is going to have less gain than a half-wave dipole. So there is no way it can be greater, purely on considerations of physical size. So the easy thing is to put in half-wave dipole, and suddenly you're done, because these 2 boxes have turned green. What does that mean? It means you're compliant. That's what it says. The limit for requiring an assessment at all is an average power less than 10 watts EIRP. Ignore the thing about peak power. That's just Ofcom trying to be clever. So 8.2 watts is less than 10 watts. Therefore, it's automatically compliant. So all you need to do is fill all this stuff into the spreadsheet and print it off or archive it in some other way. So to remind you what we've done then, we've put in the band and the mode, we put in the power, and we put in the transmit % over 6 minutes, each of which is required, and we've got 5 watts average power. Feed line didn't happen. We selected a half-wave dipole there as the easy thing to do, and we found a compliant result. So all we're interested in here is compliance. We don't care that your antenna is not a half-wave dipole. The only thing that matters is that the gain of your actual antenna is less than whatever you assume. So that's fine. It's compliant. It's clunky, but after you've done one, if, for example, you wanted to do another one for 70 centimeters, you could literally do it in seconds once you've walked your way through it, because those are the important results of these fields turning green. Right, moving on then to something a little bit different, the FM home station.
Ian, sorry to interrupt you. Just before we move on, though, can we just go back a slide? Because I just want to ask a question that I think some people may be thinking. What do you do at that point then? So you've done your assessment. Just say you've got that typical FM handheld. At what is that at the point which you can click print and it prints that out? And is that your assessment?
You can. The only additional thing you need to do is to fill in the admin, the name and address type stuff at the top, and then you can click print for a paper copy. You can save that version of the spreadsheet using Save As, and put that somewhere safe, probably together with the digital PDF copy of your own license.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Thanks for that, David. Yeah. So moving on to the home station then. A typical FM home station. I don't know about typical, but here we are. This is our white stick that we use for local FM. For the curious, the little square antenna is the GSM antenna that we use here for broadband. So you can rest assured that even in this Zoom session there is some element of radio going on. I'm pleased about that. So okay, that's the typical setup. What do we do about it? Main thing is the power's gone up. We're going to say 25 watts. And since thinking back, since 10 watts, sorry, since 5 watts from the handheld was just but not hugely inside the limit for not needing an assessment. By the time we bump it up by a factor of 5 to 25 watts, then sure enough, we're going to need to complete the whole assessment. Transmit time, yeah, it's time to start being realistic about this, and you are the best judge of how much time you spent transmitting when your thumb goes down. If you're on the repeater, then the repeater will educate you pretty rapidly. So it's fair to say mostly that if you're talking to one person, your transmit percentage should not go significantly above 50%. If you're talking to 2 people, if everybody gets an equal share, the transmit time is 33 1/3%, or in practice, a little bit less due to dead air. But it's straightforward enough to say, in 6 minutes, I'm never going to go beyond 50%, but just kind of keep it in the back of your mind. Immediately, your 25 watts has been multiplied by 50%, and your average power has gone down to 12.5 watts rather than 25. Next, we move on to cable type, and this is where John Rogers and friends have done a tremendous amount of work on the drop-down list, and it's a nice little calculator for various kinds of cable that you can say what the cable length is, and it will look that up according to what frequency you're on, and that will come out. So I've said 10 meters of RG213. I didn't need to do anything else, and it came out with 0.9 dB loss. I could have added a few other things, but it's basically an uninterrupted run of cable with no connectors or no lossy switches or anything like that. What happened? The average power has now come down due to the cable loss from 12.5 watts to 10.3 watts at the antenna, and that's the figure that Ofcom are interested in. Okay. That would mean, for example, if this station were being operated by a foundation licensee, you might have to dial or rather I might, because it's my station, you might have to dial the power down a little bit below 25 watts, and our foundation guest would be legal with 10 watts RF power at the antenna. Select antenna type. Well, actually, I'm going to stay with the half-wave dipole because that's what the short version of the white stick is. So that's fine. minimum antenna height means height of lowest part of antenna above ground, above dirt outside at ground level. The average EIRP is 16.8 watts now, so we've gone above the 10 watt limit. The peak EIRP, that's green because it's above the, sorry, it's below the 100 watts EIRP limit that says, hey, you've been cheating on the averaging or something. Yeah, just ignore that. Because 16.8 is greater than 10, this box is turned red. Use calculated compliance distance to define and manage an exclusion zone. Now that's a whole can of worms. Needs to be unpacked to some extent. First of all, what's the calculated compliance distance? What does it mean? It's actually that number there, and what's an exclusion zone? It's any zone that you need to keep members of the general public out of in order to comply with these EMF regulations. And as far as this calculator is concerned, the compliance distance is just it's a sphere drawn around the entire antenna, extending 1.3 meters away from it. Does that matter? Yes, it does, because actually 1.3 meters is not all that difficult in a home installation. It's not all that difficult to achieve that. So going back to this, there is no member of the general public who is going to wander anywhere. 1.3 meters looks like that. It's actually more sausage shaped. No member of the general public is going to get up there. So remember, no person present, 0 RF exposure, and therefore it's compliant. Okay, I'll anticipate the quibble about what's this Velux window. Well, actually, it's that right behind me, but there is still it's still more than 1.3 meters to where anywhere that I can actually get to. So it's still compliant, even though the shack here is in this upstairs room. And that's kind of fine. Once you get the hang of it, and I do congratulate the club on having appointed EMC advisors. It's very clear that that's one of the useful things that a club can do, although some clubs take some arm twisting. Yeah, well done that you've got this going. I'm absolutely sure that there's nothing completely unfamiliar that I've said already that your own EMC advisors didn't know, but it may cast some extra light on it. Okay, it's okay for small antennas, which in this context means not very directional antennas. The problems start to arise if you have a directional beam antenna of really almost any kind, because the calculator, it's deliberately cautious, so it deliberately sets out to over-predict slightly the size of the exclusion zone, because what they really want to say is, we will never underpredict it. So that means most of the time it errs on the side of caution, and it does err. The worst thing is that it predicts the wrong shape for the exclusion zone, which means that some places are inside the Ofcom RSGB exclusion zone, but in fact they don't need to be. And that's tremendously important when you begin to see where some of these places are, like underneath the antenna. Let me show you. Yeah, as I say, it can lead to unnecessary compliance problems that don't actually exist. And as a techie and as somebody who cares very much, hates to see people slink away from amateur radio when they don't need to, when they're just on the threshold of beginning to enjoy it. I hate to see that. So that's the reason I got myself involved, quite frankly. Never mind about the XNRPB stuff. That's true, but the reason is I hate seeing people driven away from amateur radio. So the exclusion zone will often be smaller than simple models predict. But in order to prove that, it takes a lot of calculation. And that is exactly what we did. This is where I just take my hat off and bow to Peter G4DSE, who is he's a computer whiz, and in his later years in Vodafone, he got involved in standards work and international standards work, which put him in touch with people in the USA in particular, through IEEE. And it turned out when this Ofcom thing first blew up in February of last year, for different reasons, the Americans were in a similar situation, doing a revision of their regulations. So the ARRL put together a team. So we joined forces, and guess what? Most of the bright people that ARRL came up with were already known to Peter DSE through the IEEE work in particular that they all were involved in. So we got a flying start there. Peter he's an expert in antenna modeling, not in being able to model exact details of individual antennas like an antenna designer would do, but in the way that affects standards work. And so I think you'll see that emerge, but as you'll gather, I have huge respect for both Peter's knowledge and his work ethic. He's hard to keep up with, I'm telling you. So we came up with this idea of pre-assessed configurations, meaning we'll do the work and we'll do a lot of calculations for different combinations of antennas and power levels, height above ground, and all that stuff. I'll unpack that in a moment. But the key thing is it's done by detailed modeling. This modern approach, the 21st century approach, is it's evidence driven. We've moved away from the hand waving ideas, which are based on just background knowledge of the physics, because it turns out that isn't enough to tell you what's going on. You've got to rub the numbers together. So we aim to cover as many practical combinations of beam antenna types, sizes and shapes, VHF, UHF bands, all the way from 50 megs to 2.3 gigs, antenna heights, power levels, as many practical combinations of those as we possibly can, so that one of them somewhere is going to be similar, close enough to your own station configuration, so that you can claim compliance off the back of this library of calculations. It isn't going to work quite like that, but basically, for any case that we haven't covered, we will guide you to the nearest case that does cover your situation. So we do the calculations and we get them blessed by Ofcom, so that you don't have to, including you don't have to engage with Ofcom. You just list your operating conditions in a fill in the form way, and we'll guide you to the nearest pre-assessed configuration that you can use as your reference. Whoops. So this is where it started. We started with something that, just because somebody kindly supplied us with a photograph, to be honest, that told its own story about what's happening. Okay, I think most people will understand if I say that this photograph was taken on the evening of the first Tuesday of whatever month it was. And the reason, Watson, that I can deduce that is that it's the typical UK activity contest setup where the guy has driven up, he found a nice high spot, parked somewhere where there aren't people milling around. He's got his drive on mast base, 8-element Yagi for 2 meters, and it's 8 meters above ground level. He's an intermediate licensee, so his power level is 50 watts. And what he wanted to know basically was, am I going to comply? And his case was, it was just so generic that we said, yeah, okay, we'll run with this, we'll do this for you. And we used it as our vehicle for development. The one additional thing I want you to notice, of course, is that the shack is right underneath the antenna. So from ground level up to where he might be standing, up to the boom of the antenna itself is only 8 meters. Is 8 meters enough? Okay. Spoilers, yeah, sure it is. It's plenty. But we had to prove it. And I'm going to walk you through this step by step, starting with something that most people are familiar with, which is the idea of the polar diagram of an antenna as it appears in a product brochure, or as it comes out of a computer model. Same thing. There are actually 2 polar diagrams here. The red one first is the one that is most interesting when we're using the antenna, which is the azimuth one. We're looking in the view onto the red polar diagram. We're looking straight down the mast in the middle, and we're seeing how the signal strength varies as we rotate the antenna or the mast. The blue one is the one that matters for compliance, because this is the elevation plane polar diagram. For the blue view, we're looking sideways on at the at the antenna. So the boom is sort of lying straight across the main horizontal line. The ends of the elements are looking straight out at you. And so top of the diagram now is up, bottom is downward, and you can see straight away that these minor lobes are a lot bigger than the ones in the azimuth plane, and also the antenna is a bit less directional in the main lobe as well. So that's fairly straightforward. We know about that, so how does this fit into into calculating EMFs? The answer is it doesn't, because first of all, when you put this antenna above ground, the elevation pattern changes radically, because it then becomes a combination of the pattern of the Yagi and the effect of ground reflections. Ground reflections are what breaks up the big main vertical lobe into a pattern of maximum slightly above horizontal, minimum, another smaller maximum, another minimum, even smaller maximum, and so on. You see the same at the back end as well, except that thanks to the pattern of the Yagi, the front to back ratio, what you see at the back is smaller than what you see at the front. If you notice that one going up in that direction, yeah, there's that lobe. So that's completely different. So how does this apply to calculation of EMF? I think most people have seen this before. How does it apply to calculation of EMF? It doesn't, because those plots I've just shown you are for the far field. They tell you signal strengths a long way from the antenna, which is what radio communication most of the time is all about. It doesn't tell you anything at all about what's the field strengths underneath the antenna, for example. We don't know. Have to do that a different way, and fortunately, most of the major antenna modeling programs will let you do this. It's a different diagram, but it gives you much more information about what's happening close up. Okay, now we're looking, here's the boom of the Yagi. We're looking at it sideways, and you can see that the vertical radiation pattern has changed quite a lot. Over at the right-hand side, you can see those alternating lobes and nulls beginning to develop. But underneath the antenna, it's totally different, totally new. None of your usual antenna textbooks even would tell you about this stuff. The field strength is indicated by the color shading. So cool colors for low field strength, hot colors very, very close to the antenna, but only there. And this contour 27.7 is the one for ICNIRP general public compliance. And okay, it's fairly obvious that this looks nothing like any of the radiation patterns you've seen before. Field strength contours are just kind of in a sausage, fairly tight around the boom of the Yagi, sticking out more in the forward direction than in the rearward direction, which is something that you'd expect. But underneath the antenna, it's cool. So what else can we say about this? Well, the RSGB and Ofcom calculator would have said at 50 watts, which is the same as this is, the compliance distance is 10.7 meters in every direction. This is a bit hard to draw on this scale because 10 meters horizontally is not as long as 10 meters vertically, but the Ofcom calculator would give you a result something like that. And you can see straight away that it's vastly bigger than the actual compliance distance, and it's bigger in two very important respects. It predicts further in the forward direction, and it also vastly over predicts in the vertical direction. So in fact, our man in the photograph was absolutely right to park his vehicle there because it is actually a cool spot. The beam antenna is beaming horizontally away from him, or over his head, I should say. So that's the basic reason. That huge over prediction is the reason why we got into this in the first place. Because if you live in fairly cramped circumstances with next door neighbours and a small garden, the difference between 10 meters from your mast and 6 meters from your mast is enormous, and the fact that there is a cool zone underneath the antenna is also enormously important. So I wanted you to see that, because that's been the main driver for why we've tried to be much more accurate about this. Because the RSGB pre-assessed configuration says at 50 watts, the exclusion zone ends at about 6.3 meters. Yep, that's about right. And most important of all, there is no exclusion zone anywhere at ground level. Anybody, members of the general public, can walk around, move around completely freely there, completely free from any EMF constraints. And that remains true fairly obviously if you move the antenna downwards, down to a mast height of maybe about 4 meters. So that's in terms of what you can and can't do under these EMF regulations. These pre-assessed configurations, if this resembles your kind of station for 2 meter SSB, these new assessed configurations are enormously liberating. It means that most people can comply almost straight off. It also is going to mean that any foundation licensee who is limited to 10 watts RF power output is going to be okay with mast heights as low as, well, we drew an arbitrary line at 2.4 meters, 8 feet, which is essentially the height where you've got to really, really, really try hard and jump in order to touch the antenna. So we set this don't touch cutoff as saying, don't put your antenna less than 8 feet. And, oh, by the way, you're not going to work anybody, or you're really going to struggle. So any foundation licensee whose antenna is more than about 8 feet high is going to be able to comply very easily. Somebody is wondering, what happens if they have a high gain beam? Yeah, if so, well done. I'm going to tell you very shortly. But okay, these figures of 6.3 and 4 meters, final numbers that they're still to be confirmed because there's a bit of practical rounding off to do, although all the calculations have been done. So don't use them yet, but it gives you some idea. But yeah, okay, that was for one band, one antenna, one mast height, one power level, and it needed a lot of computing power to produce something as simple as that. So what Peter G4DSE has set his workstation to calculate and then gone away for the weekend includes 8 VHF UHF bands from 50 megs to 2.3 gigahertz. That includes the US 220 and 902 meg bands, which I haven't featured in this discussion. It will include 2.3 gigs, but for various technical reasons, we haven't done that yet. And up to 50 different Yagis per band. We've got data for representative Yagis all the way down from 100 elements, which is not quite as ridiculous as you imagine, because there is one for 80 some elements, I think, about 80 elements for 2.3 gigs that you can go out and buy. So these big figures are relevant, but we've covered all the way down from 100 elements down to 20, 10, 3, 2, 1 actually. What's a one element Yagi? It's a dipole. It's included to complete the set, and it also gives us a little external check on our calculations because we've got other ways of doing it for dipoles. So we generally aim to cover up to 50 Yagis from a dipole to something enormous. And then in each case, in order to draw that kind of contour shaded map, it needs 35 mast heights, typically. And part of the reason for that is that you're averaging the field over the height of a standard human being, which Ofcom has agreed is 1.8 meters high. So you need a certain number of calculation points. But okay, done that. And then thousands of grid points, because every pixel in that diagram has to be basically calculated individually. And it needs more at 1.3 gigs and 2.3 gigs because the wavelength gets smaller, but the physical area that we ought to cover doesn't get smaller, so it needs more data points. The easy bit is then to scale the results for a series of useful power levels, starting at 10 watts, obviously foundation, UK foundation, 50 watts, intermediate, the 100 watt nominal barefoot transceiver, 400 watts we've thrown in for the UK full license worst case, and then we put what 20 and 200 in there, so we've got reasonable steps. And just to give the Americans some idea of what further work they're going to do, we've also had to include their legal limit of 1500 watts. But when we finally publish the pre-assessed configuration, it won't include 1500 watts, but some of these diagrams do. Okay, and as I've said, whole body averaged electric and magnetic fields around each grid point. And that's a lot of data. Okay, how many cases? 8 times 50, that's 400 times 35, that's 14,000. Thousands of grid points, so that means already well into the millions. The scaling up and down is you can do quite easily on a pocket calculator, but the E and H fields, okay, whenever we try to do this, we've lost count of the number of antenna models that have been run and calculated and mapped out, but it ends up as gigabytes of raw data. Oh goody. What the heck do you do with gigabytes of data? That goes way beyond drinking from the fire hose.
Ian, so, before you move on, if I could just stop, we have got quite a few questions and points come up, but most of them I'm going to leave until the end. But just on that particular subject, one of our viewers, Noel G8GTZ, who you may know, very keen on amateur TV, he has said here, do pre-assessed configurations actually go up to 2.4 gigahertz rather than 2.3 gigahertz to cover things like the QO100 uplinks, which of course is a satellite?
Good. That's a very good reason to change that to 2.4. The answer is yes anyway, because changes of frequency within a band are not of material importance for an EMF compliance calculation. You don't need to make that adjustment. But Noel, you're dead right. We ought to change that to 2.4 so that it then becomes completely clear.
Yes, I think that probably would work, wouldn't it? And the other thing he just mentions while we're on the subject from him, there's probably 10 times more stations he thought on QO100 than 2.3 gigs, for example.
Yeah, true.
But also he said, he asked, have you done dishes for 2.3 gigahertz? Dishes are being done separately, and it's being organised through the UK microwave group, but the technical input on modelling is backed up at the moment behind the VHF Yagis. It won't be quite the same, because it turns out that dishes can be managed a different way, but we absolutely have to have that there in time for microwave users to do their assessments in time to be compliant in November. So we've got to do that and make sure it happens. Sure.
So,
okay, and well, I'll let you get back on track. It was just that was particularly pertinent to that particular frequency. For others who've asked questions and made points, I'll definitely be reading all of those to Ian at the end, but that was one I just wanted to cover now. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, okay. Yes. Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks, Noel. I've just made a note of changing 2.3 to 2.4 everywhere, because it is important. 2.4 tells QO100 users that they are covered. 2.3 doesn't. So, yep. Okay, so we have these gigabytes of data. We still got them. What are we going to do with them? Okay. Living in Scotland, the image of distilling it down is obviously attractive, and what we're trying to do is to try and lose all the data, so we don't have to burden you with that. what we want to do is give you some guidelines that you can actually use, and a simple procedure. And that's, as I speak now, that's coming together. It's as recently as this morning. There's still been more done, and we can see where we're going now. So the main way to distill and condense the data down, first of all, is to say which parameters are important. And what I'm about to tell you is an example of where, if you only use your experience of far-field communication, then you're going to miss some points. Yeah, some of these conclusions are going to be surprising, but they only apply in the near field, very close to the antenna. Fortunately, the surprises are pleasant. The first thing that we looked at was this business of clearance distance below the antenna, so that everywhere underneath the antenna is free from any EMF restriction. And this vertical compliance distance, the mast height that's needed, it's almost completely unaffected by, well, okay, there's surprise number one. The size and the length and the gain of the Yagi make very little difference. This was a shock. We lost a whole week basically confirming that this was true. What's happening is that you've got two completely opposing features. As you increase the length of the Yagi and you populate the boom with the right number of elements, the gain goes up, the bandwidth goes down. So the beam width goes down. The vertical beam width decreases as the antenna gets bigger. So although as the antenna gets bigger and the gain increases, the field strength far out increases. At the same time, the vertical beam width is narrowing down. It's being lifted up from close to the ground and passes overhead. So you get a situation where those two effects just about cancel out in terms of what's the minimum mast height that you can tolerate. And it turns out, the worst case is probably the 2 or 3 element Yagi, where it's not very directional in the vertical plane, but it has got a little bit of gain. That's the worst possible combination. After that, as you add more elements, the vertical beam width decreases, and the mast height required increases a little bit, but not enough. Sorry, decreases a little bit. The mast height that you could use and still be compliant decreases as the vertical beam width decreases, and it works out. It's not worth bothering with that difference. If we take the worst case in every case, then none of the other antennas that we could put on that mast makes enough difference to need to put together a different rule to deal with that. So we just say for all Yagis, we can have one minimum mast height. Type of Yagi doesn't particularly matter either, because thinking there of quad loops and stacks and that kind of thing, they are all slightly less restrictive than a single flat Yagi. So but it's only slightly, so we can still stick with the same number that we had in the first place. And the final one that was the complete surprise was that the minimum mast height that you need is not affected by the frequency band. And I can only show you this, but we could never have known any of this for sure without having computed all the possible combinations to find which parameters are actually important. So, okay, here's minimum mast height for any Yagi, any length of Yagi, as I've said, or similar. I've grouped them together. The stacked bars are the height required for each of the bands up to and including 1296 megs, and you can see that there's not much difference at all, except everything increases with power level. That's obvious. As you increase the power level, the minimum mast height needs to increase as well. The other point that you see is that 1296 doesn't require quite the same mast height as the lower bands, and the reason for that is that the ICNIRP maximum allowable field strength for 1296 is greater than it is for the lower bands, and the reason in turn for that is that all the lower bands from 50 megs up to about 400, and we can include 432, can all have the potential to create whole body resonances according to the wavelength and according to how they're standing or horizontal within the RF field. So that's the main reason why all of these figures are much of a muchness, except for 1296. The other thing you notice is that there is no red bar for 400 watts or 1500 watts, because the power limit, the legal limit for 70 megs is 160 watts. So that 200 watt bar has been adjusted slightly downwards. But okay, the important thing is you can see pretty much at a glance how high does my mast need to be for any antenna. The only thing that affects that really is your power level, and it's fairly clear. I said already, foundation licensees are okay with 2.4 meters, which is our minimum touch height to avoid anybody being able to touch the antenna. It gradually goes up. If you have a 6 meter high mast, you're good up to 200 watts, and in practice you might well be good up to 400 watts when you apply a mode factor for say SSB, and which is about 50%, and when you apply a transmit receive factor as well, your average power for 400 watts PEP output is more likely to be down here than up there. You got to work darn hard to need 400 to be running 400 watts continuously for 6 minutes. So that's an overestimate. That, as I've said, is something to focus the minds of our ARRL counterparts. But in the land of tall towers, then that isn't too restrictive, to be quite honest. So that's the kind of thing that we're working towards. The vertical clearance then is pretty straightforward. And if your ground is flat and level, yeah, I know, welcome to Norfolk. I think anybody who is watching this will qualify for having flat and level ground. You have to be a bit more careful about the case where you've also got other people's houses, and particularly other people's two-story houses or more, within a relatively short distance of your antenna. Then you need to be a little bit more careful, and you need to start thinking about the forward compliance distance as well. Again, these numbers to be confirmed. We may decide to round these numbers off. Full compliance depends on more variables. That's the problem. That's a sort of depiction of the exclusion zone around an antenna. We're still on our 8 element at 8 meters above ground level. So the guy who took that photograph is certainly getting his money's worth in terms of free assessment. The orange part is the exclusion zone. It extends further up as well, but we're obviously not interested there because there's no possibility of anybody being there. But this compliance zone, it looks like a floating cheese, and the reason why it's a complete circle is that the antenna is almost always rotatable, but we don't ever want to get into the position of having to micromanage the exclusion zone and say I can use this direction, but I can't use that direction. It becomes too complicated when you're trying to operate a radio as well, especially in a contest. So what we try to say is that whatever the radius of the exclusion zone is, it potentially applies in every direction. So, okay, our man with the 8 meter high antenna, he's actually got 5.1 meters vertical clearance underneath the exclusion zone anyway, and the radius of it, as I think I said earlier, is 6.3 meters. So again, if you compare that with the Ofcom type model with the enormous sphere, you can see that we're being very much more realistic. You can also see that this distance is not going to be a problem for the vast majority of people. It only becomes a problem if A, there is something like a house that intrudes inside that radius, and B, there can be somebody at antenna height standing on a balcony or something like that inside the exclusion zone. That is almost never the case, and if it is, then I think everybody listening would say to whoever was doing that, well, don't put your antenna there, and because it's too close to the house is in the way, etc. Remember always that we put these antennas up in order to communicate effectively. We don't put them up in order to demonstrate compliance with EMF. That's not our primary aim. It's something that we have to do incidentally, and we have to make sure it's done. But our primary aim is to communicate over longer distances. So the higher the better is still as true as it ever was. The only new thing that we're saying is don't make it too low. Don't make it too close. We're still working on how to reduce this to a very simple figure, and at the moment we've got something that can be read off a graph. It's very unfortunate that the software that Peter G4DSE uses to generate these graphics does not give us something that we could effectively save as something for Ofcom. If anybody's interested, I'll go into it later. But we can draw these graphs one by one, but we can't roll them out to radio amateurs in general, which is very unfortunate. So we've got to find an even easier way if we can. We're working on it. Heaven knows we already have all the raw data. So again, final numbers to be confirmed. So I'm just trying to tell you the situation as it stands, literally as of this morning even. So that's basically the end of the technical part of the talk. I'd just like to remind you about the online resources that for Ofcom, it's www.ofcom.org/uk/EMF, and that will take you directly to Ofcom's EMF pages, and it's there that you can download a copy of your new license. So yeah, do that at least as a sort of gesture of good faith in Ofcom. Meanwhile, at www.rsgb.org/EMF, that will take you to the guidance that RSGB is producing. The ERP-based calculator that I took you through with the FM handhold and home station calculations. There's stuff about pre-assessed configurations. If you're still a little bit shaky on what an electromagnetic wave is, then there's an easy description of what it is, what the units are, the kind of the language, the currency of being able to talk about EMF. The microwave dish calculator, as I've said, that's coming. It's still in pieces on the floor, but we're pretty sure that we've got all the bits. It's just a matter of finding the bits that fit. Background information you'll find already on the RSGB site, and do follow the RSGB EMF page, because that's where you'll hear first about the updates. For practical reasons, we can't update you through Radcom because of essentially the lead times. It's about 2 months lead time, and so don't look to Radcom really for breaking news. If you want to keep up, then you need to do it on the web. We are, I don't think, expecting anything new from Ofcom. So RSGB will keep you informed, and that's it. I think you've got the idea that well, I don't know if we're a flock of swans gliding sedately across the lake, but you've got the idea that a heck of a lot of paddling goes on under the water, and that was the kind of view I was hoping to give you. Right, that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, Ian,
so back to you, David.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope you can stay just a little bit longer, because we've got a few questions and comments and things. We've actually had 3 fairly broadly similar sort of questions. So if I may, I'll put them all 3 to you. And I think they've kind of been self-answered by other people online as well. But first one came in by email during the week from one of our members, Peter M0VRA, who said, could you please ask if there's any other way of assessing the Ofcom or RSGB calculator without using Word? I think he probably means Excel there, but anyway,
Yes.
I don't have it installed on my computer, and as the full details of the equipment have not been finalised, I don't want to use the trial version of Word that's offered, and I have no need to subscribe to the app. Now, before you answer that, if I may, I'm just going to refer to another couple of very broadly similar questions about that. Paul McGee, 2E0NXL, says, can this only be done on a PC or can it be done on an iPad? And one of the other people watching on BATC, John G8VPE, says, I don't have MS Office and cannot open .xls type files. And to his rescue, and I guess it's something similar to what you may say, Sunny M0SYW says, have you ever tried OpenOffice, John, which is a free open source version called OpenOffice to open it. Anyway, they're the sort of 3 questions, but broadly the same. Do you have to have, I guess, what they're saying is, do you have to have Excel to use the Ofcom or RSGB calculator?
No. You have to have some kind of spreadsheet software, but as your last contributor has said, that there are free alternatives. OpenOffice is certainly one of them. The Excel is a personal computer industry standard in effect. So I'm not acquainted in detail with Mac software, but no, it's not only on PC. The things like OpenOffice, LibreOffice, and so on are intended to be fully compatible with Excel, and will run on other platforms, and that includes Linux, by the way. So there is something certainly functional on the Mac. John M0JAV has sweated blood to not only to make his own spreadsheet, the RSGB version, as widely compatible as possible, but also he's made quite sure that the current Ofcom version, which sets down the methodology but isn't as easy to use, is also as widely compatible as possible, which it wasn't in the first instance. The Ofcom calculator was something that they gave it to us as a gesture of goodwill, I suppose you would say, because everybody, well, RSGB, RNLI, for example, various other, the Royal Yachting Association, the Private Pilots Association, I've forgotten the proper name, all came back with, why do we really need to do this? We aren't specialists. We can't expect our members to do this. That certainly applied to everybody except RSGB, where we are supposed to know a bit about it. But we did point out that foundation licensees never signed on for anything like this. Nevertheless, they would not budge from the ruling that everybody needed to do an assessment unless they could demonstrate that they were exempt, and workable, usable exemption criteria only came in at the very last minute. So, okay, they gave us this calculator as a kind of goodwill gesture, but to be honest, they were not very far ahead of anybody else in that respect. The the calculation was good. The Excel programming less so.
Okay.
So we put in John M0JV, particularly put in a lot of work, and he's had literally thousands of emails, and most of them were about this compatibility issue, and he's tried to address them all. So yeah, there is something out there for you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. I could just add a little bit of light, actually, because I happen to be a fairly extensive Apple user, but obviously I'm working for my work anyway, in a business world where Excel, as you said, is kind of the industry standard, and they set up the .xls many years ago. But as you say, many other programs are compatible. Most of them will at least open as a .xls file, even if they don't save it, so that you can then print and save as a PDF. I can help people like Paul, who mentioned the iPad, that Numbers, which is Apple's own sort of spreadsheet program, fairly basic program, but supplied free with most Apple devices, on an iPad or a Mac, that will open most spreadsheets, or all spreadsheets that I've ever experienced, with a .xls. And as Sunny has said, OpenOffice is also multi-platform. I think it's certainly Mac and PC, and possibly Linux as well. So there are plenty of things out there. The one thing, if I may, is just a little bit of guidance. If you have a PC with a trial version of Microsoft Office on it, if you double click on something like this, it will try to open that and try and get you to try the free version and then purchase it ultimately. But you don't have to do that. The way to do that is to open it from something else. So load something like OpenOffice or Numbers, and then open the document from there. I'm sorry, that's a little bit off subject from EMC. It's a little bit of computer use, but as I said, a Mac user myself, I can tell you that that's probably the best way to deal with it. So it should be able to be opened on both. And if I may, Ian, as well, I'd just like to explain to people that the key difference, you having to base your whole RSGB version on the Ofcom version, but the reason for that really is that the RSGB version is designed specifically for radio amateurs, and the Ofcom one is designed for all spectrum users. So if you're a marine user or any other kind of user, it won't have the sort of specific information like the cable types and things that we use, as you said, and the types of antennas. So it's a good idea, and probably most people would find it easier to use the RSGB version, wouldn't they, if they're radio amateurs?
Yeah, I think one thing we would like to do eventually is to produce a slightly stripped down version of the RSGB calculator that doesn't include quite so many features that are directly tied to Ofcom. It's important to use their methodology so that everything is traceable, but it doesn't necessarily need to be quite so closely tied. Yeah, just one small point. I know it's probably a slip of the tongue, saying EMC rather than EMF. But historically, as far as RSGB has been concerned, and any organisation like a club that's had to deal with EMC, when EMF compliance has come up, it's been given to the EMC people because they have the closest applicable skill set. But the Venn diagram, the overlap in the Venn diagrams is not as strong as you think. But it's worth noting that EMF, okay, it's about the electromagnetic compatibility of the human body, but that's about as close as it gets. Okay, sorry, I've gone off on a diversion.
No, that's okay. No,
you have more questions, David.
It's fine. Yeah, I do have a few more points. And can I just mention, by the way, if you're watching us on Facebook, which normally we don't have problems with, but there are, I believe, video issues, and I don't think they're coming from here because the feed to BATC is fine. And also, I happen to know, because we're seeing a sort of a back office version of Facebook, as it were, where we do the video streaming on the computer here, and it does say that they're doing maintenance in the States during the day, which will be about now, on Facebook. So if you're having problems with Facebook, basically go over to British Amateur Television Club, where we have an identical feed. If you're having any problems on there, and you'll be able to continue watching there. I guess we're coming probably towards the end of our program anyway, but that's somewhere where you can watch it. Yeah, I must continue with some of the questions that have been asked. Stuart M0JKB, he said, evening all. Seems a very complicated way or method of saying nobody is near the antenna on my roof or located at a height way above where the average person could get. Also, need to confirm that for all licenses, the permitted power is what comes out of the transmitter and not the antenna, unless licensing regs state ERP.
That last point with respect is not correct.
Okay.
It's what's delivered to the antenna.
So in terms of these EMF regulations?
In terms of your license.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. The other point about it's complicated. Yeah. But before anybody mentioned that, had you any idea of how far the clearance distance might have to be? Would it be about a meter, about 10 meters, bigger than that if you're using more power? I mean, literally, we're starting from a place where 97% of the people who are trying to do these assessments don't even know where the decimal point needs to be, that have literally no idea of the scale of things on which they're operating. And that's part of the price we pay for the long holiday, where we as amateurs, as UK amateurs, have been kind of avoiding this subject. I'm not pleased that we're confronted with it now, but that's the reality of the situation.
One of the webinars that I hosted for the RSGB with John Rogers, I remember a German viewer coming on and saying they've had this regulation for at least 5 years, and over there they actually have to submit their readings and everything and their reports to their licensing authority. So we still don't have it quite as tough as that, I think, probably here.
Oh no, by no means. But even in Germany, yeah, they deal with it. They've had the same in the USA for easily 20 years. I think probably more, and they deal with it. They're suffering a bit of an upheaval now because they have fairly generous lower cutoff limits below which they didn't need to do anything. But yeah, people just cope with it. It's unfortunate that it's just all arrived in one big solid lump rather than people having evolved into it and been taught about it.
But as you've explained already tonight, you know, the first concerns really you've got until this November, the 18th, I think you said, to do, and it's VHF basically and up. So there is time. There's still quite a lot more time for the HF antennas.
Yes. Yeah.
I've got a question from Tom Miller. He said, "Will the description dipole be acceptable for what is actually an end-fed long wire when calculating compliance?"
Yes. Yeah, because as far as fields generated by the antenna are concerned, the half wave length of wire doesn't care where it's been fed. There's a slight qualification about that, which is that numbers of end-fed half waves antennas actually run with the feed line hot as well, providing a counterpoise. So when we get around to that, that's going to have to be pointed out and dealt with as well.
Yes.
But basically, for EMF purposes, a dipole is a dipole. X meters of wire is X meters, and it doesn't care where it's fed.
Okay. David M0WEL, first he just mentions that he uses the free LibreOffice, same open source but OpenOffice, but OpenOffice no longer supported, and he says that opens the RSGB calculator with no problems. He though comes on with a question and says the PACs clearly require a lot of work to develop. Is it realistic to have them ready by next May for various small garden HF antennas that many of us have to use?
Okay, we're talking here about the about HF down to 10 megs is the next phase. I think so in general terms, provided that people understand what their antennas are. There's so many different antenna configurations that it's hard to keep track of what the underlying antenna is. The advertising isn't going to tell you, because at a long distance, it's mainly about the efficiency of the antenna and where you put it. But there are lots of antennas, for example, which are dipoles in disguise. Don't look like it, but they're pretty much dipoles in disguise, for example. And in the same way as the end-fed half wave, it will work like a dipole if it's resonant on that band.
Right, great, thank you. Ken M0KJW says, I've got 2 multi-band antennas, but a selection of rigs and bands I can use. Do I have to do an assessment for every rig and every band? And thanks for a good talk, he says.
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, you're very welcome. This process doesn't care about your rig. It only cares about the maximum power level that you're delivering into the antenna. So what you do have to do if you have a multi-band antenna is to reassess it on each band. That's going to be a bit of a pain. But what we're hoping to do is come up with very similar simple guidelines about minimum heights and that kind of thing, and that's looking quite promising. One of the things that we did straight away almost was to look at the fields around an HF dipole, and there's an article in Radcom about that, which is reproduced on the RSGB website, and I think we explained there that there were two. We looked at 2 configurations, and they were all pretty much straightforward to deal with. What we haven't done is looked at the generality of, say, HF dipoles. We thought we had to do that all straight away, in which case it would have been a major priority. And then Ofcom, at the last moment, came up with this 18-month phase-in of compliance requirements, and therefore it's gone back down the stack while we're trying to get the VHF stuff done.
Sure, because that's the urgency.
It'll be done though. We know what to do with that, and we're learning a hell of a lot from the VHF pre-assessed configurations and how to present them.
Sure,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Paul Holman has just put an internet-based calculator on the net, just like all the other calculators, like miles to kilometers, etc. Or is that too easy? I'm not quite sure what that means. Maybe he's talking about it being defaulting to miles instead of kilometers.
No, sorry, I'm not quite clear.
No, that's okay.
About that.
Paul, if you could reword that question slightly differently that I can read to Ian, and we'd be very happy to put it to him.
Yeah, on the general topic of anybody else's calculators, then the underlying physics is the same. So it's mainly about presentation, but you do need to benchmark it and make sure it says that it delivers the same results as all the other ones that are correct.
Okay, thanks. John GVP says, I've found no mention of power delivered to the antenna in the license document. It used to be written in the old BR68 document, but not now, he says.
Okay, I can't put my hand on it straight away, but
I mean, it's quite an extensive. We wouldn't expect you to know everything about what is in the license, but I guess his main point is saying, maybe alluding to what Stuart said earlier, is that maybe it just mentions what's coming out of the transmitter and not necessarily what's coming out of the antenna.
Yeah. Okay. You need to be careful where you. If you get it out of a textbook, you need to be careful where that book was published. If it's an ARRL textbook, it will assume, because it's in the US license, that it is antenna power.
Actually, and Noel has come to our rescue.
Sorry, it's transmitter power. Transmitter power in the States, power to the antenna, to the feed point in the UK.
Noel G8GTZ has come to our rescue a little bit, because he says to G8VPE, it's in Schedule 1 and notes at the end. So there we are. It's in the small print, I guess, at the end of the license is what Noel is helping. So hopefully that helps you, John.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. Thanks,
right.
Noel.
Well, we're coming towards the end, because I know this has been quite a long programme for you, and for both of us, I guess. So we're just on the last questions now. If you've got anything you want to say, please enter that now, either on BATC or Facebook. We've got Colin M0GMK says, does the current RSGB calculator use the ICNIRP 1998 or 2020 limits? It says it uses the 1998 limits.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It brings up an important point. It uses the 98 limit because Ofcom are still using the 98 limit. And Ofcom will not be able to change until the 2020 limits are transposed somehow into UK law. The way it used to work was that when ICNIRP changed something, then in this part of the world, in Northwest Europe, it trickled down through the EU, who produced a directive, and then it was up to individual member states to transpose it, as they say, into each national legal framework. Exactly how that's going to work in the UK now, we're not quite sure, but there's other things that need to be thought about, because there are some aspects of ICNIRP 2020 which are, let's say, less than clear, and it's not certain what's going to happen about that. One thing so the RSGB calculator at the moment is also tied to the 98 limits in order to allow cross-checking. We certainly still aren't out of the phase of needing to validate that stuff. Eventually, it will come out, and when Ofcom finally irons out the problems, then we will be told that it changes. At the moment, they're saying you can use 2020 if you like, and they will deem this satisfactory. There's going to be some pretty hard arm twisting to say, except for the odd places where 2020 creates a significant difference, amateurs ought to be allowed to continue to use their existing 98 based or 20 based calculators as valid. So if 20 is allowed as valid coming in now, then going out, we should, in most cases, it should be okay to allow us to continue to use to use 98 calculations.
Fine.
The one thing Ofcom will not have is mixing 2020 and 1998 within the same calculation.
No, okay. Thank you for that, Ian. So really nearly getting there. Paul has come back and explained, and now I understand, I'm sure we all will, what he meant, which is a good point. He says there are lots of online calculators online now, like how to work out resistors in series or pounds to dollars. So I think what he's asking is, do you think that this may become an online tool where you don't have to have a spreadsheet and things loaded on your computer, but you'll just be able to enter these details online?
Eventually, yes. That's the plan. If anybody knows anybody who is capable of doing that when the time comes, then we would definitely like to hear from you. Particularly John Rogers would love to hear from you. But yeah, Ofcom used Excel simply as the easiest way for a non-programmer to develop something, and yeah, I think many of us do that. But ultimately, yeah, this stuff needs to be put into a much simpler calculator, but with more powerful graphics as well.
Yeah, and I guess that really things need to be stable, excuse me, and fully ratified and everything stable first before all that work is done to make it online, because there's probably an awful lot of work involved with that.
Yeah. One of the things which I think would be included in the specification, so to speak, would be to be able to switch when it's legitimate to do so between 98 and 2020. And that's not altogether difficult to do. G4DSE's Mathematica routines will do that, and will also switch to the US IEEE FCC limits with watch this space for whatever new thing comes out in the States as well. So he's well on top of that, and will be able to give advice.
And let's hope that something online. You mentioned that if anybody's capable of doing that, and I'm sure there are going to be lots of radio amateurs who are very good at coding and maybe good at putting something like that online. And I remember when I did the last webinar with John Rogers, M0JAV, your colleague, he actually said that if anybody's done work on particular antennas, though, that are not already there, that you'd welcome that sort of information to help you because you've got an awful lot of work to do to cover all the antennas and all the different things. I presume that's still current, that you still would encourage people to send in details of antennas modelling that they've already done to help you in your task.
Yes, please. Yeah, absolutely. The tricky thing in many ways is not doing the modelling, but it's understanding the issues which determine what you need to model and what results you're looking for. So it needs somebody who's capable of not only doing the modelling, but also a fair bit of post-processing, and even using Excel.
But if you've done that for a particular antenna that you haven't seen on the RSGB calculator, then please do share that with the RSGB committee. And if you can't already easily find the information to make contact, I can certainly put you in touch. I've had somebody ask, could you make your slides available? Are you happy to do that?
In principle, I'm happy. I would need to check with John Rogers, and particularly with Peter G4DSE, and because the slides, some of, as I've said, with those red warning things, don't use it yet. those slides are already somewhat obsolete. They will look exactly the same, quite honestly, apart from small changes in the numbers. But that's all. I will certainly share them when I can, and I'll be interested to see how this talk comes out on the BATC channel. And
the other thing is that we do record this, and both on Facebook, and also we'll upload a digital recording in the next couple of days and put it onto our YouTube channel as well. So if you do want to refer back to some of the slides, you'll be able to do it that way as well.
That's grand.
I just want to cover one other thing that was covered a little bit earlier, actually, and again, people helping online. So this was a question on BATC, which someone helped on there, but of course not everybody's watching BATC. We have roughly half and half people, so I'm going to read it out and the answer, if that's all right, because it's very relevant. Sunny M0SYW says, just playing with the calculator, most manufacturers quote in decibels and the calculator uses dBi. So any tip for dealing with the figures for this? Well, Steve G0KYA came back and said you can just add 2.15 to convert the dB into dBi. But it's a very worthwhile point, and I wanted to share that not just with you, which I'm sure you know that, but also for those of you watching on Facebook, because that certainly is something that came up before as well when I've done these talks, is that a lot of the specifications do just quote in dB and not dBi, don't they?
Yep. The Ofcom will accept either, well, as required. In dB without anything, just the two letters dB is a power ratio between two different things. So that probably ought to be understood. dBi is about antenna gain. And then there's dBd, which is antenna gain reference to a dipole, which is where the 2.15 figure comes in. But that's a lot of that's in the Ofcom documents. The Ofcom guidance for amateurs is quite useful, but I think we've amply shown that this is way beyond what our foundation licensees in particular signed up for, and everybody's having to do a lot of catching up. So I do congratulate your club for having EMF advisors and essentially cascading it down, because we're very conscious that there are very few of us who have the background to be able to do the original work. Eventually we want to cascade it downwards and outwards, but we're very grateful to people who are stepping up and just doing it now.
Well, I can tell you, Ian, that we're very grateful to you and John and Peter and all the others that have been involved in the team as well. I know a lot of work's going into this. You're all, as John, his call sign, as I'm sure he's told you, is M0JV, and he says to me that stands for just another volunteer. And I'm sure you've heard that before, and I think that applies to all of you. So on behalf of all radio amateurs, and especially the ones, of course, watching this tonight, thank you very much for taking the time to explain this from another angle as well. And it's interesting to see that it went back 30 years ago, so it's not new. It's just that we're one of the last countries probably to take this up. But we're very grateful for you explaining all of that and showing us how the progress is going as well. And we wish you well for the future in your projects there. Thank you very much, Ian, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everybody, for your attention. I hope I've made it clear enough to be able to follow. And I'm very grateful for the invitation. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Take care.
All right.
There we are, and that concludes tonight's talk all about EMF. I hope that's helped a lot of you. I know it's quite a complex subject. We do have 2 EMC advisors, as we've mentioned, who are certainly willing to help you, but obviously the emphasis, of course, has to be on it for you to do your own work on it as well. So do have a look at the RSGB calculator. I hope the comments about using programs other than Excel, most of them seem to be able to work as well. So do have a go yourself, but if not, and if you're a member of Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, you can contact our EMC advisors for extra help. But so that covers tonight, and that's virtually the end of NARC Live for this evening. Just to tell you what's happening next week on NARC, a reminder at 7 o'clock on Sunday, it's the GB2 RS News. On Monday, the 9th of August at 7:30, it's the Monday Night Net. This week with Ken M0KJW hosting. At 8:30, it's the 80 metre CW Net. And next Wednesday, the 11th of August, here on NARC Live, very important, it's an interactive night where we're coming back to you, our members, to ask you what you like from your radio club, how you see the future now that regulations, at least in England, and restrictions are lifting, and where you'd like us to go. Do you want more of the sort of talks like this online? Do you want physical meetings? We're really there to listen to you. So I hope you'll join, as many of you will join us on Zoom next week. And if you can't join on Zoom, join in the usual places on BATC and on Facebook. And you'll be able to enter your comments there. Now that's it, I think, Tammy. That's pretty much it for this evening. Yep. Quite a packed evening, quite a late evening for many of us.
But it's past my bedtime.
It's quite unusual for us to talk this late, but it is a big subject, and we're very grateful for Ian coming along. So thank you all for watching. We wish you a good week, and we look forward to seeing you next week. So for now, though, from Tammy, M0T6.
Goodbye.
And from me, David G7URP. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.